You walk out to the gravel driveway in the early morning, your boots crunching softly on the stones, and there they are. Small, stubborn green tufts of grass and weeds, pushing up through every crack, every joint, every single gap in the gravel. You walked this path and cleared it clean just 2 weeks ago. Today they are back. By next week, if left alone, they will be ankle high. By the end of the summer, nature will have taken the whole driveway back if you do not do something. And the fence line behind the barn is worse. Sticker bushes, wild vines, and crabgrass weaving up through the wire, every single one needing to be cut down before the property looks neglected. So, you do what most folks do. You walk into the hardware store and stand in the herbicide aisle. You are surrounded by shelves of heavy plastic jugs. Bottles of Roundup for $15 to $30. Bottles of complex glyphosate and Diquat combinations for $40. Massive jugs of soil sterilizers that promise a full year of absolutely nothing growing, priced at $45. The man behind the counter shakes his head and tells you these are the only things that really work. You walk out with a heavy jug, spray it, and 3 months later, the green tufts are back, and you are spending another $45. Every single spring, you have been spending $200 or $300 on commercial weed killers. And yet the weeds keep coming back. Stop and think about this cycle. Why do we accept it? Why do you pay for this every single year, as if it is a regular tax you owe just to keep your own home looking neat? How did the careful farm folks live and keep their properties clean before these massive chemical companies existed? Understand this. There are 6 honest, old methods of killing weeds that have been used by traditional farmers in this country since long before any commercial herbicide existed. They cost almost nothing to prepare. They work just as well as the expensive bottles on the hardware store shelves for most everyday jobs. And the weed killer companies have absolutely no reason to teach them to you, because there is no profit to be made from them. My grandfather killed weeds the exact same way Esther's grandmother killed weeds, the same way careful folks have done it for 150 years. And every single one of those methods still works today, exactly the same as it always did. My name is Elias Yoder. I am Amish, and I farm the soil here in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. I do not have a scientific degree, but I have a lifetime of dirt under my fingernails, and the knowledge passed down through generations who lived by watching what works and what fails. Today I am going to walk you through these 6 honest solutions: the pantry vinegar recipe, the vinegar salt mix for permanent fence lines, boiling water straight from the copper kettle, the propane flame torch, the newspaper and cardboard smothering for those deep problem patches, and the simple, quiet business of pulling them out by hand after a good rain when the soil is soft. All 6 work, but each one fits a completely different situation. Knowing which one to reach for is the whole skill. Let me give you an honest limit right now, because I refuse to misinform you. Folks online will use bold words and promise to stop weeds for good. The plain truth is, there is no honest way to keep weeds from coming back forever in this country. The seeds blow in on the wind every spring. The birds carry them in from the next field over and drop them in your gravel. It is nature's way to cover bare ground. But what I can show you are 6 traditional methods that will knock down what you currently have. Keep your fence lines and driveways clear for a full season, and save you the $200 a year you have been handing over to the hardware store. That is the honest math of a self-sufficient homestead. These old ways are not folk superstitions. Modern agricultural extension offices, places like Purdue University and the University of Minnesota, have tested these exact methods and confirmed their effectiveness. They work because they rely on unchangeable natural laws, not expensive branding. When you apply a strong acid, it destroys the waxy coating on a leaf. When you apply intense heat, the water inside the plant cells boils and expands, rupturing the cell walls instantly. It is simple, practical science, stripped of the high price tag. Think about the difference. When you spray those commercial jugs, a heavy, bitter chemical smell hangs over your yard for days. The ground looks gray, lifeless, and poisoned. But the old ways feel different. There is the sharp, clean scent of white vinegar cutting through the heat of a July afternoon. There is the soft, satisfying hiss of a flame wand passing over a gravel path, turning stubborn wild mustard into ash. There is the damp, rich smell of the earth turning over after a thunderstorm when a mature dockweed comes out cleanly, root and all, with a single steady tug from your bare hands. There is a rhythm to it, a quiet respect for the land that doesn't require a hazardous material warning label. But you cannot just rush out and start pouring things blindly. Every one of these old tools has a sharp boundary, and this is where many folks fail. Vinegar will wither a leaf in an hour, but if you do not know how to make it stick to the plant, it will simply slide off into the dirt and do nothing. Salt will keep a fence line bare for months, but if you use it on sloping ground, the next heavy rain will carry that salt downhill into the roots of your prized shade trees, yellowing the leaves and killing them by the next season. The method is only as good as the understanding behind it. I want you to see exactly how these solutions are prepared, handled, and applied on our farm, starting with the common items sitting in your kitchen pantry right now. Let me show you the precise way we mix the first solution, the one that turns a vibrant green weed into a crisp brown shadow by sunset, and the single everyday ingredient you must add to ensure it doesn't just run off the leaf. Let us walk over to the wooden workbench in the back of the barn, out of the direct glare of the morning sun, and lay out what we need. This is where the work truly begins, away from the theories and closer to the actual dirt. To prepare this first solution correctly, you need to understand the materials before you blend them. First, look at the container. You want a standard plastic pump-up garden sprayer, the kind with a wand and an adjustable nozzle. Here is the first real mistake many beginners make. They reach for an old metal sprayer or something with brass fittings because it feels sturdier. Do not do this. Horticultural vinegar is an acid, and it is relentless. It will corrode metal tanks, eat away at copper wands, and ruin brass seals from the inside out within a single season. Stick to heavy-duty, high-density plastic. It holds up to the acid, it is light to carry down the driveway, and it allows you to see the fluid level through the side of the tank. Now, let us uncap the main ingredient. This is the 20% or 30% horticultural white vinegar. When you look at it in the jug, it looks completely innocent, clear, thin, and indistinguishable from pure well water. But the moment you turn that plastic cap, the deception ends. The smell hits you instantly. It is not the gentle, familiar tang of the 5% vinegar you use to pickle cucumbers in the kitchen. This is a sharp, aggressive, concentrated scent that commands immediate respect. It fills the air of the barn stall in seconds, sharp enough to make your nose wrinkle, your eyes water, and your throat catch if you bend too close. When you pour it into your plastic sprayer, do it slowly. Watch the liquid flow. It has the same consistency as water, but as it hits the bottom of the tank, you will see a slight vapor rise if the air is warm. Because of this, you must protect yourself. Stand upwind so the fumes do not blow back into your face. Wear a pair of thick leather or rubber gloves, long pants, and sturdy boots. If a single drop of 30% vinegar lands on a bare wrist or a finger, you will not feel it for the first 10 seconds. Then, a sharp, white-hot stinging sensation will start as the acid begins to dehydrate your skin tissue. If that happens, do not wipe it on your shirt. Rinse it immediately with plenty of cold, clean water from the pump. Treat it with the same caution you would give to a hot iron or a sharp axe. Once you have poured 1 full gallon of the clear vinegar into your sprayer, it is time to add the second ingredient, the dish soap. You need exactly 2 tablespoons. Standard blue or green dish soap from the kitchen is perfect. As you pour it from the spoon, watch how it behaves. It drops into the clear vinegar like a thick, heavy ribbon, sinking slowly to the bottom of the plastic tank in a distinct colored wave stop. and understand why we are doing this. If you were to spray plain vinegar onto a weed, the liquid would form tiny, round beads on the surface of the leaf. Plant leaves are smart. They are covered in a fine, waxy coating called a cuticle, designed specifically to repel water and keep moisture inside. The vinegar beads simply roll off the leaf, slide down the stem, and soak into the dirt, where the acid would be neutralized by the soil before doing any real damage. The dish soap is our secret key. It is a surfactant, which means it breaks that surface tension. It flattens those water beads, forcing the vinegar to spread out into a thin, continuous, wet sheet that clings tightly to the leaf like a coat of fresh varnish. Without the soap, you are wasting your vinegar. With it, the weed cannot shake the acid off. Here is another classic beginner mistake. Once the soap is in the tank, people tend to grab the sprayer and shake it violently up and down to mix it. If you do that, you will create a massive, thick head of white soap suds that fills the entire upper half of the cylinder. The foam will clog your pump tube, spill out of the top threads, and leave you with nothing but air bubbles when you try to spray. Instead, take a clean wooden stick and stir the liquid slowly in a circular motion for 30 seconds. Or, if the tank is capped, simply rock it gently side to side, letting the heavy soap roll through the clear vinegar until the color is uniform and the consistency looks slightly thicker, like a thin syrup, with no frothy bubbles on top. Now, screw the pump handle down tight and look up at the sky. Timing is the second half of this craft. If the sky is gray, or if there is a hint of rain in the forecast for the next 12 hours, leave the sprayer in the barn. Vinegar needs time to sit on the leaf to draw the moisture out. A sudden afternoon shower will wash your hard work straight into the gravel before it can bite. You want a day where the sun is bright, the sky is clear, and the heat of the day is settling in, ideally above 75 degrees. The sun is your partner here. The vinegar breaks down the leaf's protective armor, and the intense midday sun cooks the exposed tissue from the outside. Walk out to your driveway cracks or the edge of the garden patch. Adjust the nozzle on your wand. You do not want a fine drifting mist that hangs in the air like a fog. A light breeze can carry a fine vinegar fog 5 feet to the side, landing on your heirloom rose bushes or your garden vegetables, and it will wither them just as quickly as a weed. Adjust the nozzle until you get a coarse, heavy spray. Small, heavy droplets that fall straight where you point the wand. Hold the tip of the wand just a few inches above the center of the weed, right where the leaves bunch together at the root crown. Squeeze the handle. Listen to the steady, wet hiss of the fluid leaving the brass tip. Move the wand in a small circle, soaking the entire plant until the leaves look dark, wet, and the solution is literally dripping off the tips onto the stones below. Now, step back and let the natural laws do their work. Walk away for an hour, then come back and look closely. This is the most satisfying part of the old way. You will smell the sharp tang of vinegar mixing with the heavy, sweet scent of wilting green vegetation. The vibrant, bright green of the wild mustard or the plantain will have faded into a dull, bruised, muddy olive color. The leaves, which were standing stiff and proud an hour ago, will look limp and deflated, losing their structure and flattening against the hot gravel. By the 4th hour, the edges will blacken and curl inward. By evening, the weed will be a dry, brittle, dark brown shadow that cracks when you step on it. But remember the honest limit of this first method. This beautiful, quick kill only happens above the ground. For small, annual weeds with shallow roots, this single midday soaking is the end of them. They are gone. But if you are dealing with an old, stubborn dandelion or a thick patch of thistle, that deep, fleshy taproot is still sitting safely down in the dark earth, untouched by the acid. In 2 weeks, you might see a tiny green eye pushing up from the center of that burnt crust. Do not think the method failed. That is just the root using the last of its stored energy to survive. The question is, what do you do when that deep root refuses to die? Or when you have a long stretch of fence line where you cannot afford to walk out and spray every 2 weeks? That is where we must change our strategy and reach for the second method, the one that adds a common white mineral to the mix to lock the soil down for the entire season. Let us sit down for a moment on the edge of the porch, look out over the yard, and think about the true nature of what just happened to that weed. To use an old method safely and successfully, you cannot just blindly follow a recipe like a machine. You must understand the underlying laws of creation that make it work. Let us peel back the big scientific words you find in textbooks and look at the simple truth of the matter. Understand this. Every single plant leaf is wrapped in a living skin. On the outside of that skin sits a microscopic layer called the cuticle. Think of it as a premium canvas coat that has been rubbed thoroughly with oil to shed the rain. It is a shield designed by nature to do two things: keep the morning dew from soaking into the tissue too deeply, and keep the plant's internal moisture from evaporating into the hot afternoon air. When we mixed those 2 tablespoons of plain dish soap into the clear vinegar, we created a solvent. The soap immediately cuts through that oily, waxy shield exactly the same way it cuts through the grease on a mechanic's hands or the lard left on a cast iron skillet after supper. It strips the raincoat right off the weed. Once that shield is dissolved, the 30% acetic acid goes to work, and its behavior is incredibly aggressive. Acetic acid at this high concentration has a desperate, violent hunger for water. Stop and think of a completely dry, compressed block of peat moss or a hard-baked sponge dropped into a shallow puddle. It draws every drop of moisture into itself instantly. The acid acts like a chemical sponge. The moment it touches the exposed leaf cells, it tears through the cell walls and drinks the water right out of the plant's internal tissue. The water inside a plant cell is what keeps it stiff and upright, what we call turgor. When the acid violently pulls that water away, the microscopic walls collapse like an old leather boot left out in the sun. It is a dehydration so rapid and so severe that the plant tissue is literally destroyed from the inside out while standing in a puddle of its own juices. This is why the bright summer sun is your essential partner in this method. If you spray on a cool, overcast day when the air is thick and damp, the acid's hunger slows down. The plant has time to use its internal defenses to patch the wounds. But when the thermometer climbs past 80 degrees and the sun is beating down on the gravel, the acid strips the moisture, and the sun bakes the defenseless tissue. It is a double blow from which a tender leaf cannot recover. Now that you see the science plain, let us speak with absolute honesty about the boundaries of this tool. This is where most modern folks fail. They look for a magic trick that solves every problem with one pull of a trigger, and when it doesn't work, they blame the old knowledge. Every tool has a line where it works and a line where it stops. You must know exactly where those lines are drawn. First, understand that horticultural vinegar is a contact killer. This means it only destroys the living tissue it physically lands on. It does not travel through the veins of the plant down into the deep earth the way a heavy commercial chemical like glyphosate does. Because of this limitation, vinegar is highly effective on annual weeds, but it struggles against perennials. Look closely at the weeds pushing up through your driveway cracks. If they are annuals, things like crabgrass, chickweed, common purslane, or pigweed, they are shallow-lived. They grow from a tiny seed in the spring. Their roots are shallow and fibrous, like a small, tangled beard just an inch below the stones, and they put all their energy into their leaves. When our vinegar mix toasts those leaves to a crisp, the engine of the plant is destroyed. It has no backup plan. It dies completely, root and all, because it has no deep reserves to draw from. For these annuals, the vinegar is a perfect final solution. But now look at the perennials, the ancient, stubborn enemies of every gardener. I am speaking of deep-rooted dandelions, Canada thistle, wild burdock, and curly dock. These plants do not live for just one season, and they do not rely on their leaves for survival. They have spent years driving a massive, thick, fleshy taproot straight down into the subsoil, sometimes 2 or 3 feet deep into the dark earth. That taproot is like a subterranean pantry packed tight with sugars, starches, and life energy. When you spray your 30% vinegar on a mature dandelion, you will see a beautiful, satisfying kill by evening. The top will be black, dry, and dead. But understand this, you have only burned down the chimney. The furnace is still fully fueled underground. Give it 10 to 14 days, and that deep root will simply open its pantry, use its stored sugars, and push a brand new set of vibrant green leaves right up through the middle of the burnt crust you left behind. If you want to use vinegar on a perennial, you must be prepared for a war of exhaustion. You must walk out there and spray it a second time, a third time, and perhaps a fourth time over the summer, every single time a fresh green leaf dares to show its face. Eventually, after many beatings, the underground root will empty its pantry trying to rebuild the leaves, and it will finally starve to death in the dark. If you have the patience for that daily observation, the vinegar will work. If you expect a single spray to cure an old thistle patch forever, you are wishing for a miracle that nature will not provide. The second boundary is woody brush. Do not waste your vinegar on established wild blackberry brambles, poison ivy vines thick as a man's thumb, or wild rose bushes behind the barn. The bark on those stems is too thick, too heavily protected by layers of dead fiber for a gentle topical acid to penetrate. You will spot the leaves. You might cause a few tips to drop, but the core of the vine will stand completely unharmed. The final boundary is the surface beneath your feet. Vinegar is an acid, and over years of repeated use, it can slowly etch and weaken soft concrete walkways, limestone steps, or decorative flagstones, making them rough and prone to flaking in the winter frost. And never, under any circumstance, spray this mix across your green lawn to kill a patch of clover or dandelion, unless you want a large, dead, circular brown scar in your turf that will take 2 months to mend. Vinegar is completely non-selective. It does not know the difference between the wild mustard you hate and the fine bluegrass you love. It attacks everything green with the exact same merciless hunger. Knowing these limits isn't a sign that the method is bad. It is simply the mark of a master practitioner who knows when to put the vinegar down and reach for something stronger. Because when you are standing at a permanent fence line behind the barn, where you want absolutely nothing growing for the rest of the year, and you cannot afford to walk out and spray every 2 weeks, you need a different strategy. You need a mix that doesn't just burn the leaf, but stays behind in the earth to lock the ground down tight. Let us step over to the fence line, and I will show you how we add a simple white mineral from the kitchen to achieve exactly that. Let us look backward for a moment, because you cannot truly see where you are going until you understand where your feet are standing. This simple method of using the sour fruit of the orchard harvest and the white salt of the earth is not a new invention, nor is it a clever modern trick discovered on a computer screen. It is a steady line of practical wisdom that stretches back through centuries of quiet, careful husbandry. Illinois Extension, University of Illinois stop, and think about how our grandfathers lived. Before the late 1940s brought the dawn of synthetic chemistry and the massive commercialization of products like 2,4-D and, later, glyphosate, a farmer could not simply drive to town and solve a weed problem with a plastic card. He had to be a steward of his own resources. If a patch of thistle took over a fence line or wild grass choked a stone walkway, he looked to the larder, the barn, or the woodpile for his answer. In the old agricultural journals of the 19th century, and even back to the manual texts of traditional European estates, you will find records of folks using sea salt, rock salt, and strong vinegar ferments to keep their paths and stone courtyards clean. It was a matter of necessity, thrift, and common sense. If you spent your hard-earned silver on imported chemical treatments when you had a barrel of sour cider and a bag of coarse salt sitting right in the shed, your neighbors would have questioned your judgment as a manager of a farm. Understand this. What the old folks knew simply by watching the midday sun bake a treated leaf, modern science has now spent decades measuring with precision in laboratories and test plots. We are not leaning on folk superstitions or old wives' tales here. In the early 2000s, the United States Department of Agriculture's Agricultural Research Service took these traditional methods into their research fields. Scientists like Radhakrishnan and Teasdale published official bulletins confirming that a 15 to 20% solution of acetic acid delivers a 95 to 100% kill rate on the above-ground foliage of common broadleaf weeds. Later field trials by agricultural extensions across the country, from Purdue University to the University of Vermont, have laid the data out plain for anyone to read. The science confirms exactly what the old people practiced. The acid destroys the cell membrane, the water leaks out, and the plant dries to ash. The old folks didn't need a microscope to see it work. They just needed to look out at the gravel by evening and see the brown, brittle ground. Publication: USDA Arsthere is a quiet dignity in remembering these solutions. When you stand on your property this week, I want you to look at those small green tufts pushing up through your gravel, not as a disaster that requires a $45 plastic jug of poison, but as an invitation to practice a bit of honest self-reliance. Think about how simple it truly is. A gallon of horticultural vinegar, a couple of spoons of dish soap, a cup of salt for the fence lines where nothing should grow, or just the copper kettle singing on the kitchen stove. These are tools that do not ask for your dependency. They do not require you to sign your name to a warning label or worry about what your children or your livestock are breathing in when they walk past the barn. They are solutions that belong to you, mixed by your own hands, tested by generations of folks who cared for the land long before we were here, and who will continue to care for it long after we are gone. So, here is my quiet request to you this week. Step away from the herbicide aisle. Leave the heavy plastic jugs on the hardware store shelves. Walk back to your own kitchen, look at what you already have, and try the old way just once on a single stretch of driveway crack or along the edge of your mailbox post. Watch how the liquid behaves. Smell the sharp, clean tang of the vinegar as it meets the hot stones. See how the green turns to a dark, bruised olive color under the steady heat of the afternoon sun. You do not need to spend $200 a year to keep your home neat and well tended. You only need a little patience, a respect for the natural laws, and a willingness to remember the knowledge that the rest of the world has forgotten. It is a small step, a measured habit, but it is how we keep the old traditions alive in a world that is always rushing towards something complex and expensive. Pour the vinegar, boil the kettle, choose your spots with care. And remember that the truest, cheapest solutions are almost always the ones that have been sitting right under our noses for 150 years. That is how the old folks did it. That is how it is still done on any farm or homestead that values an honest day's work and a clean piece of earth. Take care of your land, and the land will take care of you.